And I know from just walking up here on this stage that Harriet is one of these people, is a big book gal. So help me give a real warm welcome to Harriet R. from Miami, Florida.
Thank you, George. My name is Harriet. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a member of the Coral Gables group in Miami, Florida. And I didn't start to get really nervous until just a few minutes ago when George told me about putting on his wife's bra. I want to thank the committee for inviting me. I want to thank the committee for giving me a lovely room with two of the nicest ladies I've ever met. I'm one of those people who not only lives alone, but I've been a loner like most of us all my life. And it's always kind of scary to me when I come to a place like this and I know I'm going to be assigned a roommate. And when I saw my name on the list with two roommates, I said, oh my God. But Doris and Elsie have just made me feel so comfortable. Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Elsie. Thank you, committee, for giving me these two ladies. I always try to plan how I'm going to start, and you know I haven't quite got that yet, because I kind of want to start at the end. I want to start with 4 months ago today. I had gone to Lima, Peru, on December the 22nd last year for a 2-week vacation. And I joined a tour of 17 people. And as you know, they're all strangers for the first 5 minutes. But within 24 hours, we make a few friends. And we had gone out on the 23rd into the jungle of the Amazon River, down in a place called Iquitos, and we'd taken a boat on down a little farther. And that afternoon we returned from a boat trip, and the boat is one of the kind of a jungle queen type of thing, and or the African queen too, you know, not quite as romantic as Humphrey Bogart, but silly, I jumped out of the boat, and I don't know what happened, but I came to with a fractured foot. Second day out with a group of strangers, and I was helpless, and I needed a lot of help. I needed all those strangers to help me. And they talked about flying in a seaplane to get me out of the jungle, and I can tell some outsiders about the piranhas and the sharks, but you won't believe that. But I would say there was a very handsome fellow there. He wasn't Harrison Ford, but he did help me up and down those steps. But they flew me into Lima and gave me a choice of surgery there or try to get on the Christmas Eve plane, December the 24th. I said, you get me on the plane. And they not only did, but I had help all the way home. And all I did was just sit in my wheelchair, although in Iquitos they couldn't find a wheelchair and they pushed me around on a typist chair. And I'm laughing all the time, and people were saying, why aren't you upset? I said, you know, what's to be upset about? They didn't know I had a program. They didn't know that I had just to take care of things 1 minute at a time, and that I was in their hands, and they didn't know that we were all in the hands of God. And 4 months ago today, on December 26th, they operated on my foot, and they projected then that I would be 3 months in the cast, and about 4 months, which would be April 26th, I would be pretty mobile. Now, when Dave Cook called, 2 months ago approximately, I was still in the cast, and he invited me to come, and I said, Dave, what dates? He said, April 24th, 25th, 26th. I said, I'll be there. And I felt it was God calling me. I really did, Dave. I didn't really know it was you. I just thought. These 4 months I have been to fewer meetings than I have been in all the years of my sobriety. And I want to tell you folks something. If you ever, and I know when we get a little older, as we all seem to be doing, that we miss meetings for one reason or another. And sometimes our income isn't as great as it used to be. But if you can pay any bill at all, pay your telephone bill. God, do we need that telephone, we in Alcoholics Anonymous. I could pick up that phone anytime. I've got a phone in every room now, including the bathroom. It's fun. My sobriety date is January the 14th, 1956. I celebrated my 30th birthday at home this year. 3 people came to my home and we had a Chinese takeout dinner with a birthday cake, and then we had an AA meeting. And it was one of the loveliest birthday meetings I've ever been to. 30 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I thank you, God. And I got sober occasionally in my younger days, but I never could stay sober. I'm one of those people who believes I was born an alcoholic. I believe that I had all the alcoholic tendencies from the time I was born. I remember hearing about booze early on. Bootleg days. We lived in the country and we had a lovely home remodeled from an old farmhouse, and there were many, many doors. And the door over here was known as the preacher's door. No one came to that one except the preacher, and he didn't come very often. But there was the grocery delivery door, and there was the milkman's door, and the newspaper door, and then back where the garage was, we had a beautiful 3-car garage on a different level, and that was the bootlegger's door. These memories come from about age 7, 8, 9, and 10, and I don't think that the normal 10-year-old remembers the bootlegger's name if it's Andy Bittenbender. But it has stuck with me all these years. Don't recall ever seeing the man, but I remember the name. He also would leave. He would ring the doorbell and put the bottle inside. It was brown bottle, and it was called Rittenhouse. And that's a famous square in Philadelphia. And when I lived in Philadelphia for a while, I thought it was rather romantic. Again, this isn't normal thinking, I don't think, that you associate a little romanticism with a bootlegger leaving a bottle of booze. And that bottle was kept in our bathroom. It was for medicinal purposes. And when someone wanted a highball or a drink, you went to the bathroom to get the medicine and bring it to the kitchen and mixed up a drink. And that was the way my family drank in those days. And to the best of my knowledge, I think my father had a drinking problem, but there was never any excessive alcoholism in our home. But they loved their beer, they loved their midnight snacks, and they'd play cards. They were bridge players, and I was an only child. Many of us are only children. And I believe this is where my selfishness, my self-centeredness, the root of all my problems, the book says, it believes the root of all our problems. I believe this was part of my alcoholism. I was spoiled, I was not a brat, I wasn't a bad kid, I was just, I was loved and given everything that I wanted. Certainly everything I needed, and a father who doted on me, and he didn't like to hear me cry, and he was one of these fathers who, long after I had been weaned away from the bottle, he carried my formula in the bottle, and whenever I got a little upset, he'd pull this bottle out, and here was this big child walking around with sucking on a bottle. My mother was to say in later years, my God, we just got her off of one before she got on the other one. I had my own car before I was old enough to have a driver's license. I had a wonderful education. I had parents who, my father was self-made, and he wanted me to have all the benefits that he did not have. My mother was a college graduate when it was unusual for a woman to go to college, and she wanted me to have the experience and benefit of a good education that she had had. And between them, they wanted me to be perfect, and I had a hard time because I couldn't be perfect. And I wanted to be perfect, and that was harder because I couldn't please myself either. And so I went away to college when I was 15 years old. And I graduated when I was 19, and I was going to be a school teacher. But like several people have said before me, you know, I didn't buckle down and study. I didn't buy the ticket. I didn't study my lessons. I didn't do that. I coasted by and barely got a C average, and I thought I was dumb. I wasn't. I just hadn't applied myself. I was a social butterfly. In my day, I hate to say my day. I think I look around at some gray hair. It was your day, too. I went to a school that was operated by the Methodists. It was the American University in Washington, D.C. And a lot of our young men were what we called PKs. Do they still have them? Preacher's kids? Well, my boyfriends mostly were PKs, and they were having that last rebellious time before they became preachers. And so we tried different things, and we had sometimes a little booze. It was never much. I can remember 4 people splitting a pint. Can you imagine? But I know that I was alcoholic from those early days because I could smell it, and I would know how to react. I would giggle and carry on, and it made me feel different. It made me feel part of, and I wanted to be part of so badly. I wanted to feel a little superior, and I didn't have to be. We were all on the same social level, so pretty much the same financial level. But I didn't understand that. I just felt left out. Yet I was popular, and we had fun. But that booze always did something for me. Changed my personality. Made me whatever or whoever I wanted to be. And so when I graduated from college, I found out that we were broke. My father told me that he'd had a very difficult time financially getting me through that last year. And as I look back on it, I didn't realize this for many years. As I look back on it, here was a 18, 19-year-old woman studying to teach. I was going to teach Romance languages. I studied psychology, studied education, studied my French and Spanish and Latin and Greek and all that stuff. And I didn't know that there was a depression on. I didn't know about that big, big depression back there in the 30s. I didn't know who was president of the United States. We had a mock election on campus. And I thought that these were some of the students that we were voting for. We had a fellow named Ken Hoover, and I voted for him. You know, not Herbert, but... I was absolutely innocent and ignorant. I wasn't dumb. I just was too self-centered. I was too busy having a good time and looking out after me. And so I had to find a real job instead of teaching school. And my parents then told me to take a secretarial course because I could always find a job as a good secretary. And I became a good secretary. And at the end of that teaching, they said, well, now you go and you apply for a job, and why don't you try for a job with the federal government? And I did, and I was accepted, and I got a summons to report for duty in Philadelphia at the quartermaster depot in South Philadelphia. I was 20 years old, and now I was leaving parental guidance, the guidance that teachers had been giving me. I was losing my managers. My parents had chosen my friends pretty much for me. I would bring home a fellow from college, or they would come to visit, and I would go there to visit, and my friends would say, well, I don't care much for him. Don't bring him home again. Don't go out with him, but do go out with this fellow. And they would choose, and my mother would send me pretty dresses to wear to the parties, and she'd write and say, now wear your silver slippers with this. And I was being told what to do. And my teachers had done this with me in school. And now I went to Philadelphia, and my parents settled me into a little rooming house, and they left me, and there I was in Philadelphia. In a very short time, I had a new manager. I began to go to work every day, and Friday afternoons in particular, they'd say, let's stop off in here and get a beer. And we'd stop and have a beer, and they'd say, well, now, what do you want to do tomorrow night? We'll go over to Camden because we have blue laws in Pennsylvania. You couldn't drink after midnight. And so we'd go over to New Jersey so we could drink later in the morning. And I began to find it a little odd that even on Sundays we'd be running over to New Jersey to drink. And I was 21 years old, and I was a full-blown alcoholic, and I didn't know it. And I began to realize that I was drinking a little too much, but I didn't know that I had an illness called alcoholism. I didn't know that it was a compulsion, that if I didn't take the first drink, I couldn't get drunk. But I was a little concerned because I knew I didn't drink quite like they did. And in this little room of mine, it was on the second floor, and it was overlooking the front. It was a row house, and I had a bay window in my room. And it overlooked the front porch, and it was one of those slanty roofs that they have up north so that the snow will slide down. And the snow was there, and I used to keep my beer. Now, I'm going to do some things now to stop from drinking so much, but I had my beer lined up on the bay window sills and leave the windows open a little crack so the beer would stay cold. And I remember the name of that, too. It was, I said I did, Gret's beer. And so I took up painting. I thought, well, I'll get me a hobby and I won't drink so much. And I took up painting by the numbers. And one evening I was reaching over for one of these beers that I was painting to not drink so much of, and I accidentally knocked it out the window, and it rolled down through the snow and down the roof and into the drain gutter. Now there were several more beers there, and they were not little cans, they were quarts. But I went out the window and I shinnied down the roof to retrieve the bottle of beer, and as I turned around to clamber up through the snow and the ice and be careful not to break the precious bottle of beer, it occurred to me that this was not social drinking. And I began to switch drinks. We were in South Philadelphia, had a lot of Italian places, and we began to drink a lot of red wine. Never occurred to me not to drink. Never occurred to me. The Philadelphia Quartermaster's School was there, and I transferred there to work. And then we were ordered to move down to Camp Lee, Virginia, in Petersburg. I understand it's now called Fort Lee. But back in the biggie, as Sue said, it was World War II. It was Camp Lee, and us, we young ladies were invited to come down to do the work, filing, the clerical work, and we didn't know it, or I didn't know it, but the young bachelor officers were told to make sure that the young ladies had a good time, because they didn't want us running home to Philadelphia or wherever. And so we were wined and dined by the young bachelor officers. We had officers' clubs and swimming pools, and it was a lot of fun. And I had a lot of fun. And we used to go, I remember back up in Pennsylvania when I was still 18 and 19 years old, we'd go from Wilkes-Barre up to Scranton, and they'd say, well, now let Harriet drive home. She's got a hollow leg. She can hold her booze. And I was the one that could drive home because I could drink them all under the table. Many of us have that in those early days. But a few years later, at Camp Lee, we'd go up to Richmond to the Tantilla, and thanks to Buddy, he brought out that name yesterday. I'd completely forgotten it. I asked Buddy if you still had to take your own booze and buy setups, and he referred to the Tantilla. I said, that's it. That's where we used to go. And but I never remembered coming back at all from the Tantilla. Never did. In those few short years, my illness had progressed to that extent that the hollow leg was built up and my resistance was gone. I began to be absent from work and things were not doing too well. One of my bosses said to me one day, Harriet, do you think you could type more than one letter today? And I had no excuse because most all of our drinking was run right there at Camp Lee at the Officers Club at the Quartermaster School as well as in the main camp. And World War II came along December the 7th, 1941. And I began to think, that old alcoholic thinking, I better get out of here. These people are getting me drunk. And I decided I would join one of these services, and I looked over the services very, very carefully. And I chose the Marine Corps. And the reason I chose the Marine Corps was because I had examined very well the uniforms. And I loved red then as I love red now, and the Lady Marines wore olive drab uniforms, but they had a red ascot tie. I could have gone to the dime store and gotten one of them, but I wanted to join the Marine Corps. And one day when I couldn't make it to work, and I knew that they knew that I was drunk and I couldn't function, and I got on a bus and I went to Richmond. I think it was the post office building, but I don't know now, but I knew then. And I got on the elevator, and I was shaking by the time I got there. I needed to drink badly, but here I'm going to join the Marine Corps, and I got to be macho, and I got to be accepted. I didn't want to be rejected. I'm smiling, and I'm dying inside. And I'm very busy concentrating on signing my name to all these papers, because by this time my hand was shaking so badly I couldn't always sign my name. Have you ever had that hand just fly out there? And the people look at you if you're trying to sign a check for them, and your hand is out here. And so I'm busy concentrating on that, and so he said, well, I'm going to swear you in now. And I raised my hand, and he swore me in, and he said, welcome to the United States Navy. And it is like yesterday. I stepped back and I said, sir, I came here to join the Marine Corps. He says, honey, you got off on the wrong floor and you are in the Navy now. And he said, we're going to send you to Northampton, Massachusetts, and you will become an officer within 6 weeks. I don't want to be an officer. I'm not a leader. Oh, you will make us a fine leader. Little did he know. They made me an ensign, and later they promoted me to junior grade lieutenant. And it was just like in civilian life, I felt. I'd come in hungover on a Monday, or maybe I wouldn't even come in Monday. I'd wait till Tuesday or Wednesday when I could make it, and I'd sneak in the back door. And they'd say, gee, where were you yesterday? Millie quit, and and you've been promoted to her job. So I thought the same thing in the Navy. You just hang around and do the best you can, and they keep promoting you. And I've often wondered about some of our admirals. But glory be, they made me into a leader, they thought. They assigned me 8 seamen. I had a warehouse full of ammunition, and you want to be very glad that I was in the Supply Corps, because they did not give us the live stuff. We got it after it had been shot off. And they gave me 8 seamen to help take care of these warehouses and all that ammunition, and they gave me a forklift truck. A Jeep was fine, and the little pickup truck was fine, but the forklift truck was mine. And after a 3 or 4 martini lunch, my 8 seamen would wait for the show. And I would pick up those pallets of dead ammunition, and I would transport them, and I'd raise them to the ceiling and get them down to the bottom, and I'd go scooting Katie bar the door. Until one day, one of those seamen said to me, you're not nice anymore. What's happened to you? You're mean. Where'd you learn that language? We'd been having a good time together, my 8 seamen and myself, and one day one of them told me the truth, that I had become a different person. And I pretended I didn't hear him or care, and I just went blithely on my way, but I remember it. It took me a long time. We called him C.C. I didn't remember his name for a long time. I can see his face, and we called him by his initials, C.C. Thank you, C.C. These things were beginning to get into my head. There was something wrong. And I knew it was alcohol, and I didn't know it was an illness, and I didn't know what to do. Self-knowledge is not enough. It wasn't enough for me. And so again, I had to run away after I got out of the Navy. They put us out on points, and I got my points, and I left. And I was down the Pentagon building one day, and there was a recruiting sign. And off I went to North Africa, and that's no place for a single woman, World War II immediately. But I went to North Africa and Algiers, and that's where I met my Arab. Now, he wasn't just any old Arab. He was a chieftain. He had a title. His title was that of Qaid, and that's like being the mayor of Dade County or the mayor of Richmond. And he was the mayor of an oasis in the Sahara Desert, and the name of the oasis was Busada. And so we went down to Busada, and we rode our camels into the sunset. And in my fantasies, I really thought I was going to dwell in a tent forever, with oriental rugs on the floor, little boys to fan me, and somewhere, somehow, I was going to live on grapes that other people were going to toss into my mouth. This was my fantasy. But we had to return, and as we did, my Arab rode a little ahead of me, and I admired the garment that he was wearing. My Arab wore a garment called a burnous. You may have seen them on television. It's like a cape, but it has a hood. And it flowed so gently as his camel went ahead, and I watched that flow gently, and I said, oh, that's such a beautiful garment. I want it. And it was fortunate because he wanted my Navy raincoat. And so there in the middle of the Sahara, we traded. And when the State Department said go home to me, I took my burnous and went home. State Department did things up nicely back then, and they sent me home on a very lovely, beautiful first-class liner, and I wore my burnous as an evening wrap. And I flaunted it, I waved it, and I was gorgeous, and I thought I was a spy. And I would lurk in corners with my cape over my face. And one day I realized that burnous was not made of white silk, that it wasn't the glamorous, lovely garment that I thought it was. It was made of brown wool, and there were moth holes in it, and it was gritty with sand. And the Arabs used these things to wrap around their sick goats and camels, and it stunk. And I don't know whatever happened to that garment, but I got back home. I never went to jail. I should have many times. I never physically hurt anyone that I know of, but my hurts to people were emotional and spiritual. My parents, who wanted their little girl to grow up to be a lovely lady, didn't know how to handle me. They had sent me to elocution school. They had sent me to dancing school, not only to learn to dance, but to learn my manners, and to wear the nice little white gloves and the black patent leather shoes, and to be a lady. Excuse me. And I can remember walking the Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C., where my parents were living. And I came out of the Mayflower Hotel one day, not on my own steam. The management had asked me to leave. And they escorted me to the side door, which is on LaSalle Street. And it so happened that our neighborhood cop was walking the beat, and he saw me being gently eased out of the Mayflower Hotel, which is one of the loveliest old hotels in the world as far as I'm concerned. And he said, "Let me walk you home, Harriet." And he took me a few blocks to Scott Circle. There's now a hotel there, but we lived in one of those brownstones. next to the rifle club, near the rifle club. And my parents came to the door, and the policeman handed me over, and I slumped down in one of the chairs. And I can remember either my mother or father saying, "Why? Why do you do this?" And I know now that they were looking at this drunken woman and perhaps remembering the little girl that they had sent to dancing school and elocution. And white gloves and all that business. And I was so sick and so drunk, and I said, "What the hell do you care? I'm not hurting anybody but myself." And inside I was crying out. I said, "Oh my God, I don't want to be like this. I don't know why. I don't want to be like this," and I didn't know what to do. And so I had to keep running. And I went to hospitals. They threatened me with hospitals, and I just took off and started running. And the last hospital I went to was not of my own choice. I had lost complete control of my life. But on my last geographical cure, I headed for Florida. I had read that you could get a divorce quickly in Florida. Now, where I read that, it didn't matter. But I had married a merchant marine officer over in Italy, and that's another story. I signed on as his purser and got married. And you're not supposed to sign on people as pursers on a merchant marine ship. And we had a court-martial. And I had dyed my hair red when it was over there in Africa, and it turned out orange. And I was letting it grow, and it was half black and half orange. Now, I believe that I was living in an alcoholic daze because I thought I was very glamorous. And I thought I was living a most adventurous life. You know, the book tells us that we talk about our adventures, and I think, isn't that a mild word for what we've been through? You know, adventures, my God. But I went to Florida, and through the grace of God, AA members came to my hotel room. And if they had not come, I would have died that night. They saw how ill I was, and they put me in a place in Jacksonville, Florida, called Grand Haven, the drying out spot. And from there, I don't know what they did or how they did it, but the Veterans Hospital in Salisbury, North Carolina, welcomed me. And you see, I know now that it didn't matter whether I got the red ascot tie from the Marines or a blue suit from the Navy. I was a veteran, and I had to be ready for the Veterans Hospital to take me. And it was a brand new hospital. They'd only been there about a year. And they had a lady doctor who knew something about alcoholism. And she invited the AA members from Salisbury, North Carolina, to come and talk to a few of us who had a drinking problem. And it was early in December that they came. And the other ladies really didn't want to listen. We were producing the Christmas play at the Veterans Hospital of Salisbury, North Carolina. And that's a big production in a mental hospital. And I was King Herod. Now, it may not be the star part, but it's pretty good. And I had a gorgeous costume. It was red, of course. Kings wear red. And everybody was dressed in accordance with their part. And I could tell you a lot about that Christmas play, but I think the most important thing that happened was the three of our shepherds escaped. And in all these Christmases that have gone by, I never failed to think about the citizens of Salisbury looking out their windows on Christmas Eve and seeing three shepherds run down the streets of Salisbury, North Carolina. I had entered that hospital about Labor Day of 1955, and Just after the Christmas play, the rumor was that I was going to be discharged soon. And I had been doing a lot of what I know now was meditating. It was just sitting and daydreaming a little bit is what I thought it was. But I had gone back through my life. And the main purpose of going back through my life, as far as I could remember, was to find out what was a nice lady like me doing in a joint like this. But what I was doing, I was taking an inventory. I was taking what we know now as a four-step inventory. And I went back through my life, and I saw that my life was kind of like that burnoose. I thought it was a glamorous, high-living life, and what it was dirty. It was brown, like that brown wool. And it was full of holes, and it was gritty. And I'd been around too many dirty people in too many dirty places. Just like that burnoose, and it stunk. And I was going to be 39 years old in just a few weeks, and I thought, my life is a mess. My life is a complete mess. And I need help. And they discharged me on January the 9th, and they said, now you've got some money here in the bank. It seems that fellow that I'd married had divorced me while I was incarcerated in the mental ward. And I empathized with Dennis last night. He went to OT, and what we made was little ashtrays and little leather belts. And we had PT, and I was not very good at PT. That's physical therapy. So they let me be the pin setter. I was a very good pin setter. And the thing I liked best was HT, hydrotherapy. That's when you lay in a tub of warm water and they put a tarpaulin over you and you just lay there and sleep. That's lovely. There have been some days, many days, in these 30 years of sobriety that I would like to be back there in that tub, just with a tarpaulin over me and just laying there. Because 30 years of living sober is, I'd like to tell you about that. And I will. But I came into this program on my birthday, on January the 14th. But on that Monday, January the 9th of 1956, when they discharged me, they wouldn't give me all that money. And I don't think that was the whole resentment. I think the resentment was they had told me to go out there into the world and don't drink. And no one yet had told me how not to drink. Those folks from Salisbury had come and said, there's a place to come to. You come to Alcoholics Anonymous. And there was some literature going around. And I had received a pamphlet in the mail. And the pamphlet was called A Letter to a Woman Alcoholic. I got that in the mail. And I said, that's dumb. And I stuck it down in the chair, and I never saw that pamphlet again. But later on, I came into the program, and I opened it up, and it says, I'm having to write to you. I'm writing you a letter and putting it here where you will find it and hide it. Yeah? I said, well, how do they know that? And I began to believe immediately because you saw me hide it. I knew you knew, and I knew that you knew that I knew that you knew. I believed everything from the first day. But on Monday, January the 9th, I bought a bottle. And I don't remember buying it. The first thing I remember, I hadn't had a drink in 4.5 months in that hospital. But I had that bottle in the ladies' room of some railroad station. And I took the first drink out of it to be the last bottle. And I saw my face change. I saw my eyes change. It came to life. You know, that elixir went down, and it was like an umbrella. It opened up that whole new life again. And I knew I was crazy. I said, I'm just out of a mental hospital. I was put there because I couldn't live in society because of my drinking. I must be crazy. And when I read in this big book of ours, where Bill was standing at the bar on that Armistice Day, and he took the drink, and the man next to him at the bar says, after what you've told me, you must be crazy. And Bill said, I am. And I read that, and I said, that was me that day. I knew I was crazy. Alcoholic insanity. I knew I wasn't locked up in a mental institution because I was legally insane. Every day that I was there, I knew I could get out. I knew that. I knew I was there because I couldn't live in society without drinking. And society no longer wanted me. I was no longer welcome anywhere, at any level, not even in the lowest level bars where I had gone to drink so I could be superior to somebody. And I was about to run out of those. I couldn't find any more places that I could feel superior to anybody. And so I drank, and I knew that I was powerless. It was like in the mirror, remember Alice got bigger and bigger, and she could go anywhere. She'd take a drink, drink me, and you'd get bigger or you'd get smaller. And that bottle was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I said, oh, that bottle is bigger than I am. And I accepted what I had been admitting for years. I had admitted to bartenders, they'd say, you're an alcoholic. And I'd say, yeah, I know. But I didn't know what to do about it. And so now I accepted the fact that I was without power over alcohol and that my life was a complete mess, a complete shambles. And I came to believe that there was a power called Alcoholics Anonymous that could tell me how to live in a normal fashion. Second step. And I made a decision to go there and let them run my life. Third step. And being convinced, I was at step 3. But having taken that first drink, I had set up the compulsion. What Dr. Silkworth calls in the physician's story, the phenomenon of craving that no non-alcoholic can ever understand. As long as they live with us, they will never understand the phenomenon of craving that Dr. Silkworth repeats several times in that story of his. And I had set up that phenomenon of craving, and I couldn't stop. And I tried to control it, and I tried to sip. How do those social drinkers do that? The ice melts and goes bad. But I tried to sip, and on Saturday morning the train was pulling into Miami, and I'd been on a lower berth, thank God, all that Friday, the 13th of January. And I had tried not to drink, and I would have to take a drink, and I would go down the end of the car, the train, and they'd have these little pointy cups, and round to the, flat, and you pull them out, and then you turn on the spigot, and it was in a chemically thing like a fire hydrant or something, and you'd open up this flat cup, and you'd get the water in there, and then you'd have to get the bottle, and you have to take the bottle, and there's no place to put a pointy cup, and you got to take the cap off with your teeth, and by the time you get to it, you've shipped out most of it. And that's the way I was drinking Friday the 13th of January, and I knew that I was hopeless and helpless, and I was in that helpless state of mind and body that the book talks about. I was beyond human help. I had been to all the human help that I knew. I'd been to doctors, psychiatrists, religious people. I'd traveled with all the people, the places and things, and we pulled into Miami about 6 o'clock in the morning. I was fresh out of a mental hospital. I was fat. I'd been sitting at the diet table and sneaking over to the other table to eat their food. And I was fat, and I was ugly inside and not too pretty on the outside. And I said, please, God, no more. And that was my last. A minute before, I had no chance at all. And I looked at my birth certificate. And on January the 14th at approximately 6:20 in the morning in 1900, I had been born. And it was about that time on January the 14th, 1956, that I was reborn. And I knew that I couldn't get any decent employment, and I went to the meetings with Alcoholics Anonymous, and I said, please tell me how to live. And they began to say, well, you come here every day. And I had a cousin in Miami, and I stayed with her. And then I got a little apartment in my aunt's apartment building. And I said, I've got to get my own place to live. And they said, no, not yet. And I said, I've got to get a job. And they said, no, not yet. And they said, oh, look at that cute fellow. And they said, no, not yet. But one day in the paper there was an ad and it said secretary wanted, temporary help wanted, 1 day at a time. They said I could take that job. And I took that job 1 day at a time, and I stayed there for a little over 13 years. And I learned to have fun again. I learned to laugh, and I believe in belly laughs. I think if you haven't had a belly laugh lately, get yourself one. It's great. Laughter is wonderful. It's healing. And I did meet that fellow, and I did marry him. And we had a June wedding, and I was less than 5 months sober, and I don't recommend it. And I got all the things that I thought I wanted. I had a good job, and I had a husband, and we had football tickets, and we played bridge, and I learned to water ski, and on one ski, and I began to enjoy wonderful living. And then I found out that my husband, who had told me he'd been around the program for 16 years, and I was too new to know that that was not being in the program. He'd been a slipper for 16 years, and he had his first slip in about 6 months, and I thought it was my fault, and I took on all the guilt. And I began to understand that I'd married the slipper, and I began to think, well, I can make him well, because I'm not drinking. And thank God I never took a drink, but I nearly went crazy, because my wonderful husband never did stay sober. He knew this book, and he could talk it, and he could come right out of the sanitarium and go to an AA meeting and tell you how to stay sober. And he helped me. He gave me this program, and I've been able to put it into my life. When I was going into my 7th year of sobriety, his drinking got him into real serious trouble. And I began to fall apart. Now, everything had been coming so easy to me. I had never had a sponsor. I had chosen certain people to be my spiritual guiders. I had chosen certain people as role models, and I tried to follow their direction. I had not yet had a spiritual experience. I wanted a big flash. And I would study people who I thought were spiritual, and I'd ask them what books they read, what church they went to. And I was trying to find out all these things without one single sponsor. I still today do not have one. I have many. But in those days I didn't. But when things began to get rough, I began to call these different people. They'd give me different advice. They'd tell, read page so-and-so in the big book. And I think I'd wake them up in the middle of the night and they'd grasp any number. They'd say page 22 or 92, whatever came into mind. And no matter what page they gave me, there was value to it for me. And I began to get into this program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Today, when I'm talking about steps to a new group, I say, please do these steps now. Be fearless and thorough from the very start. Because I was with fear and not thorough until my 7th year of sobriety. I never took a drink. And I stayed sober because that's our primary purpose. And I was carrying a message to alcoholics, but I was telling them my drunk story, much as I've spent too much time on this morning. But now I want to tell you how I stayed sober. I stayed sober those 7 years on fellowship, I believe. I stayed sober because I had taken a kind of an inventory back in there, and I stayed sober because I had completely accepted the first 3 steps. And I was fortunate that I was able to take a 5th step with this wonderful husband of mine who, though he couldn't stay sober, he knew how to help other people. And I took a 5th step with him. And then I jumped to the 12th step and started carrying the message that I didn't really have. And I came across the writing of Bill Wilson's. He wrote it back in the Grapevine some years ago. He said some people can get along on kind of a mediocre kind of sobriety, and that's where I was. I had a mediocre sobriety. And I used to fuss because no one had ever asked me to be their sponsor. And one little lady who's very well known in our area named Claire, she said, do you ever think maybe you haven't got anything to give away? And again, I pretended I didn't hear that. But I heard it. But that's when I began to get into my steps in my 7th year of sobriety. And if you're new, please follow my experience and get into these steps from the very beginning. Be fearless and thorough from the very start. From the very start. Because I went back over those steps and I did a written 4th step inventory. So many people who don't stay sober say, well, I never wrote my 4th step. So I thought for a long time that 4th step inventory I'd done back there in the hospital was a pretty good one. And it was. But I'd confused a lot of things and I had to write it down. It had to be a written inventory. And then one day I I'd been asked to do a series of step meetings, and I was going to be doing a 4-step meeting that night. And I'd heard a beautiful new word. It's not a real word, it's a made-up word. The word is PAGGLES. P-A-G-G-L-E-S. It's an acronym you make up from the first letters of the 7 deadly sins that Bill uses in our 12 and 12. Pride, P for pride, A for anger, G for gluttony, G for greed, L for lust, E for envy, and S for sloth. PAGGLES, P-A-G-G-L-E-S. And I was playing with it on a piece of paper, and I said, I think I'll talk about these PAGGLES tonight. And then I said, I don't want to talk about these negative things tonight. I want an up meeting. And I said, I'm going to put down some positive PAGGLES. And so on opposite the word P for pride, I put down some P words. And first thing I thought of was, of course, the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. Practice the principles. Practice the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I thought of another word that began with a P that we need so much, is patience. So many of us want everything right now. And we wanted it, as in the old days, we wanted it yesterday, and we wanted more. We always wanted more. Never had enough. Could have it all and still want more. And so we have to get some patience. And peace. Dennis talked about the peace of mind. Hal talked about the peace of mind Thursday night. Peace of mind. And the progress that we make. We talk about growth and progress. This is what are the principles? The principles are guides to progress. That's what the book says. Right after the 12 steps, it says the principles we have set down. What are they? They're guides to progress. Guides for growth. Guides for getting better. And how do we do it? Through prayer. Another word with a P. Power of prayer. And oh, how I've learned the power of prayer in this last 4 months, when I get despondent by myself. And of course the program itself. And this A, instead of anger, I thought, well, we'll talk about attitude. All the A words, the awareness, the acceptance, the appreciation, the abundance of things that we have to come alive and be alert. I love a happy sobriety. And the G, the gluttony. You know, we talk about growth and gratitude. And the G for greed, we now talk about generosity, and we talk about generosity of self, not just putting the money in the basket. We need that kind of generosity too, but giving of ourselves, giving of our time. And so many of us today think that if we taxi someone to a hospital, we've done a 12-step call. Hell no, don't be a taxi service. Give of your time and give them your love and give them that honey, that tender, loving care. That's generosity, and that's 12-step calling. People tell me, oh, I had a horrible 12-step call last night. I had to get up at 12 o'clock and take him to the hospital. I said, oh, you poor thing. Generosity. And lust. What do we know here is love? The newcomer comes in and they think we're a little crazy when we say we love him. And they learn to know that we don't all have to like each other, but we sure do have to love each other. And we come in here and we learn that envy has to go, and we have to find freedom, and that's emancipation, and that's a good word. And we find energy in this program of ours. We find energy to do all these good things that we learn how to do through the patience and the principles and the prayer and the power that we're given. And then S for sloth. We don't need to talk. That's a big one with me. I'm a very lazy, mentally lazy person, and I have to be very careful about my discipline, the discipline that I've learned. And so I like the S words for serenity, of course. Serenity and sanity that we've regained, and the self-respect. Oh my God, that self-respect that I can stand here and call myself a lady, that I can have some dignity. And look, I think my mother would like to see me standing here with my white gloves and my black Mary Jane shoes. Spiritual program. Service. We recover. Well, thank God for that unity. Thank God for that first meeting I went to, and you were there in unity. All you did was say, hey, we're alcoholics, and if you have a problem, we're here to help you. We'll tell you how we did it. And they talked about our common welfare. The only thing that we all have in common is our alcoholism and the recovery and service. And we give back. Pass it on, Bill said. Pass it on. And I have to go back to the G's, the greed and the gluttony, and replace with growth and gratitude and generosity. And the biggest G of them all is here in this room and every AA room that I've ever been to. And without that biggest G of all, I couldn't be here, because on January the 14th, 1956, I was hopeless and helpless. And today, through the grace of God, I'm here to be with you. I want to thank you for inviting me. I've been worried about that bell. You know, Tom said the other night that the bells signal, first of all, to get up, and the other one was to go eat. And I just knew that when this bell rang, you were going to do both. So I'm glad they delayed the bell a few minutes so you didn't get up and go. And that the living sober, these 30 years, it hasn't been all upsy-daisy and hunky-dory. The big book says, you know, we trudge through the road of happy destiny. And I've done my share of trudging. My husband died in 1973. It was alcoholism, it was pills, it was all kinds of complications, and it took him a long time to die. I had gone to Al-Anon, and God bless them, they tried to help me, and I didn't hear much. I'm sure they said a lot of good things, but they used a word that I couldn't understand. They said detach. Detach with love, and I couldn't understand that. And then I went to a little convention over in New Orleans. And a beautiful lady, and I just heard this morning that she's going to be your guest speaker next fall. It's a rumor, I guess, but Elsa C. And I went to hear Elsa speak that morning in New Orleans. And she was talking about her alcoholic. His name was Chuck. And I knew she was talking about him, but I also knew that she was talking about my alcoholic. He was talented, he was handsome, he was charming, and he was going down into that pitiful and incomprehensible degradation that the book talks about. And I knew about that because I'd been there too. And my husband was handsome and charming, and he knew this program, but he was going into that incomprehensible degradation. And she said she had to learn to release with love. And it was like a little bird in the hand fluttering and releasing. And I could understand that, and I was able to release my husband. I loved him to death. I babied him. I enabled him. But he died. I had no control. And it was after he died that I was so lonely and miserable, and I'd cooked a little chicken one day, and I went to wish on the wishbone, and there was nobody there. And that was the loneliest moment that I can remember, not having anybody to wish a wish with. And my phone rang about that time, and they said, why don't you come to the quarterly? Now, I'd been to a couple of quarterlies as a sightseer. I'd been to some conventions, and I knew that it was a place where sober alcoholics gathered, and I said, okay, I'll go. And I came back from there, and I said, please, I want to be your GSR. They said, you can't be, we've already got one. So I had to wait my turn. But this began the last, since 1973, I've been active in service. Give back to your program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It has come back to me 1,000-fold. Love and service. Love and service. Pass it on. Thank you very much.
Now, do you all see why I said that God sent a special girl to be in my life?
It's red. Red.
On behalf of the committee, Harriet, we give you this little token of appreciation. God bless you. For those of you that will, help me close now by praying together our Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. That's your heart.